The widow Theresa Bennett stood at the edge of Pecos, Texas, her calloused hands arranging wildflowers in mason jars as the scorching July sun beat down on her worn bonnet in the summer of 1873. Two small faces peered from behind her dusty skirts, her children Mary and Thomas watching as their mother prepared to sell the only thing they could harvest from the dry land surrounding their modest cabin on the outskirts of town. The flowers were scraggly things, mostly black-eyed Susans and Indian blankets pulled from the creek bed before dawn, but they brought color to the dusty streets, and that alone made them worth something to the miners and ranchers passing through. Theresa had been a widow for nearly 2 years now, ever since her husband Daniel had been thrown from a spooked horse and broken his neck on the rocky ground. She was 24 years old, though the sun and worry had etched lines around her eyes that made her appear older. Her children were 5 and 3, hungry more often than not, and completely dependent on whatever she could scrape together through selling flowers, taking in mending, and occasionally cleaning the church on Sundays for a few coins. The main street of Pecos bustled with activity as cattlemen drove herds through toward the railhead. Prospectors searched for supplies before heading into the unforgiving desert, and gamblers sought their fortunes in the saloons that lined the thoroughfare. Theresa positioned herself near the general store, knowing that men flush with wages or winnings sometimes bought flowers on impulse, perhaps thinking of mothers or sweethearts far away. She had been standing there for nearly an hour, her children sitting quietly on a wooden crate nearby, when a tall man rode up on a chestnut mare. He dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle, his boots hitting the packed earth with a soft thud. He was broad-shouldered and lean, wearing a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes, and when he looked up at her display, Theresa saw that his eyes were a striking shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. "How much for the flowers, madam?" His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight drawl that suggested he hailed from somewhere further south, perhaps Louisiana or Mississippi. 5 cents a jar, Theresa said, keeping her voice steady despite the way her stomach clenched with hope. If she sold even half of them, they could have beans and cornmeal for supper, maybe even a bit of salt pork. The cowboy looked at her display, then at her children, then back at her face. His expression was unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "I will take them all." Theresa blinked, certain she had misheard. "Sir, all of them. How many you got there? Looks like about 20 jars." He was already reaching into his pocket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. 22, Theresa managed, her heart beginning to pound. That would be $1.10. The cowboy counted out the coins and then added another $1. "For your trouble in arranging them so pretty," he said, handing her the money before she could protest. "My name is Benjamin Sawyer. I run a small ranch about 10 miles north of here. Just got paid for a herd I brought up from Mexico. Been on the trail for 6 weeks, and I forgot what beauty looked like until I saw these flowers." Theresa took the money with trembling hands, tears pricking her eyes though she fought them back. "Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. Thank you kindly. I am Theresa Bennett, and these are my children, Mary and Thomas." Benjamin Sawyer tipped his hat to the children, who stared at him with wide eyes. "Pleased to meet you all." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Mrs. Bennett, I wonder if you and your young ones might join me for supper this evening. There is a decent restaurant here in town, serves a fine steak and all the fixings. I would appreciate the company, being as I have been talking to nothing but cattle and horses for the better part of 2 months." Theresa opened her mouth to refuse. Years of proper upbringing, and the knowledge of what people might say warring with the desperate hunger in her children's eyes. She had not had a proper meal in weeks, surviving on thin porridge and whatever vegetables she could coax from her struggling garden. The children had never tasted steak, had barely tasted meat at all in recent memory. "I could not impose," she began, but her voice lacked conviction. "It would not be an imposition, madam. It would be a kindness to me. Like I said, I have been alone too long on the trail. A man forgets his manners without folks to practice them on." Benjamin Sawyer's expression was earnest, and there was something in his eyes that made Theresa believe he was genuine in his loneliness. "Then we would be honored, Mr. Sawyer," she heard herself say, and Mary tugged on her skirt with excitement while Thomas's face lit up like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "The restaurant opens at 6. I will meet you there if that suits." Benjamin gathered up the mason jars carefully, loading them into his saddlebags and tying the rest to his saddle with practiced efficiency. "Until this evening, Mrs. Bennett." He rode off before she could change her mind, leaving Theresa standing in the dusty street with more money in her hand than she had seen in months, and an invitation that felt like a dream she might wake from at any moment. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Theresa took the children home to their small cabin and used some of the precious water from their well to wash their faces and hands. She brushed Mary's tangled blonde hair until it shone and did her best to mend a tear in Thomas's only shirt. For herself, she put on the one good dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that had been her Sunday best before Daniel died. It was faded now and mended in several places, but it was clean and modest. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Theresa walked back into town with her children. Her stomach fluttered with nervousness, and she questioned her decision a dozen times with each step. What would people think? What would the church ladies say when they heard the widow Bennett had dined with a strange cowboy? But then Thomas slipped his small hand into hers and looked up at her with such trust and happiness that she pushed the worry aside. Benjamin Sawyer was waiting outside the restaurant when they arrived, and Theresa noticed he had cleaned up considerably. His face was freshly shaved, his hair was still damp from washing, and he wore a clean shirt under a brown vest. He looked younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw and a slight scar above his left eyebrow that gave his face character. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, removing his hat and offering a slight bow that made Mary giggle. "You look lovely. And these fine children clean up real nice too." The restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps that cast a warm glow as evening deepened into night. The proprietor, a stout woman named Martha, raised her eyebrows when she saw Theresa with Benjamin, but said nothing as she led them to a table near the window. Other diners glanced their way with curiosity, but Benjamin seemed oblivious to the attention as he helped Theresa with her chair and made sure the children were settled. When Martha brought the menus, Benjamin did not hesitate. "We will have 4 of your best steak dinners, with all the trimmings. And milk for the children, coffee for the lady and myself. And bring some of that apple pie for dessert." Mary and Thomas could barely sit still in their chairs, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. Theresa tried to remember the last time she had eaten in a restaurant, and realized it had been before Daniel died, back when they still had hoped that their small homestead would prosper. "Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Bennett," Benjamin said, once Martha had bustled away. "Have you been in Pecos long?" 3 years, Theresa said, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. "My husband and I came from Missouri, thought we could make a go of farming, but the land is hard here and the water is scarce. Daniel, my husband, he tried ranching too, had a few head of cattle, but then there was an accident. "I am sorry for your loss," Benjamin said, and the sincerity in his voice made Theresa's throat tighten. "It has been nearly 2 years now. We manage." She did not want to burden this kind stranger with tales of their hardships, of the nights she lay awake wondering how she would feed her children, of the constant fear that they would lose even the small cabin they called home. "Those are fine children," Benjamin said, watching as Thomas carefully examined his fork with intense concentration. "They seem well-mannered and bright." "They are good children," Theresa agreed, feeling a surge of pride despite their ragged circumstances. "Mary helps me gather the flowers in the morning, and Thomas, he is learning his letters. I teach them what I can." The food arrived then. Great platters of steak and potatoes, green beans swimming in butter, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and gravy rich enough to make Theresa's mouth water. She had to help Thomas cut his meat, and she watched with a full heart as her children ate with the careful deliberation of those who knew hunger intimately, and refused to take a single bite for granted. Benjamin ate with good appetite, but without the rough manners she had seen in many cowboys. He knew which fork to use, kept his elbows off the table, and made pleasant conversation without prying into matters that were none of his business. "I came out here from Mississippi 5 years ago," he told her between bites. "My family had a plantation before the war, but after, well, things changed. My father lost everything, died of a fever when I was 20. My mother passed a year later. I had a choice to make, either stay and work land that was not ours anymore or head west and make my own way." "That must have been difficult," Theresa said softly. "It was the right choice for me. I worked on various ranches, saved my money, learned everything I could about cattle and horses. Last year I was able to buy a small spread, nothing fancy, but it is mine. Got about 300 head now, good water from a spring, enough grazing land to expand if I am careful." "It sounds like you have done well for yourself, Mr. Sawyer. Please call me Benjamin, or Ben if you prefer." He smiled at her, and it transformed his face, chasing away the weathered seriousness and revealing genuine warmth. "And I suppose I have done all right, but it is lonely work. A ranch needs a family to make it a home, not just one man and a couple of hired hands." Theresa did not know how to respond to that, so she focused on her own meal, savoring each bite of the tender steak and creamy potatoes. When was the last time she had eaten until she was full? She could not remember. The apple pie came, generous slices topped with cream, and Thomas actually laughed with delight when he tasted it. The sound was so rare and precious that Theresa felt tears threaten again, and she had to look away. Benjamin noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything. "Children should laugh," he said quietly. "It is the best sound in the world." When the meal was finished and they stepped out into the cool evening air, Theresa felt she should say goodbye and thank him and return to their cabin. But Benjamin fell into step beside her, leading his horse and walking them home through the darkening streets. "I meant what I said about being lonely," he said as they walked. "The ranch is 10 miles out, so I do not get to town often. When I do come in, I tend to my business and leave, do not have much occasion for conversation." "I would think a man like you would have no shortage of company," Theresa said, then immediately regretted the forward comment, but Benjamin just chuckled. "You would think wrong. Most folks see a cowboy and figure that is all there is to see. They do not look deeper. And the women in town, well, the respectable ones would not consider a man who smells like cattle and leather, and the ones who would consider me are not the type I am looking for." They reached her cabin, which looked even shabbier in the moonlight than it did during the day. Theresa felt a flush of shame at the sagging porch and the oilcloth covering the window where glass should be, but Benjamin did not seem to notice or care about such things. "Thank you for the supper, Mr. Sawyer," Theresa said, ushering her sleepy children toward the door. "It was the kindest thing anyone has done for us in a very long time." "The pleasure was mine, Mrs. Bennett, truly." He hesitated, turning his hat in his hands. "I wonder if I might call on you again. I come to town most Saturdays for supplies. Perhaps we could take another meal together, if you would be willing." Theresa's heart leaped and plummeted at the same time. Part of her desperately wanted to say yes, to have something to look forward to bask in the attention of this kind and handsome man. But another part whispered warnings about propriety, about the dangers of depending on anyone, about the risk of letting her children grow attached to someone who might disappear as suddenly as Daniel had. "I do not know if that would be proper," she said finally. "I understand. But the offer stands if you change your mind." Benjamin mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "Good night, Mrs. Bennett. Sweet dreams to you and your children." He rode off into the darkness, leaving Theresa standing on her porch with her heart in turmoil and her children pulling at her hands, chattering excitedly about the wonderful meal and the nice cowboy who had been so kind to them. That night, after she tucked Mary and Thomas into the narrow bed they shared and kissed their foreheads, Theresa sat by the small fire and thought about Benjamin Sawyer. She thought about his kind eyes and gentle manner, about the way he had treated her children with respect and warmth, about the loneliness she had heard in his voice when he spoke of his ranch. She was lonely too, she realized. So desperately lonely that sometimes the silence of her cabin felt like it might crush her. She had been surviving for 2 years, focused entirely on keeping her children fed and clothed and safe, with no room in her life for anything resembling joy or hope. But tonight, for the first time since Daniel died, she had felt something stir in her chest that might have been possibility. The next Saturday, Theresa found herself preparing flowers again, though she told herself it was simply because she needed the money, not because she hoped to see Benjamin. But when she positioned herself on the main street with her jars of wildflowers, her heart beat faster every time a rider approached. He came at mid-morning, and the smile on his face when he saw her made her stomach flip in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, dismounting and approaching her display, "you have outdone yourself. These are even prettier than last week." "Thank you, Mr. Sawyer." She tried to keep her voice steady and professional. "Would you like to purchase some flowers today?" "I would like to purchase all of them again, if you will do me the honor of joining me for lunch at the restaurant." His eyes held a challenge and a question, and Theresa knew this was a moment that mattered, a fork in the path where one direction led to safety and sameness and the other to something unknown and potentially wonderful. "Yes," she heard herself say, "we would be pleased to join you." And so began a pattern that continued through the summer and into autumn. Every Saturday, Benjamin would ride into Pecos and buy all of Theresa's flowers, and they would share a meal at the restaurant while Mary and Thomas grew increasingly comfortable with the kind cowboy, who always had a penny candy or a small toy in his pocket for them. People talked, of course. The church ladies whispered behind their hands about the widow who was keeping company with a cowboy. The shopkeepers speculated about when there would be a wedding. But Benjamin was always proper and respectful, never overstepping the bounds of decency, and eventually even the most critical gossips had to admit that if Theresa Bennett was going to keep company with any man, she could do far worse than Benjamin Sawyer. As the weeks passed, Theresa found herself looking forward to Saturdays with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. Benjamin was easy to talk to, and she found herself sharing things she had not spoken of in years, her hopes and fears, her memories of her parents who had died of cholera when she was 17, her dreams for her children's futures. Benjamin shared too, telling her about his childhood in Mississippi, about the war that had torn his world apart when he was just a boy, about his determination to build something lasting in this hard land. He spoke of his ranch with love and pride, describing the clear spring that never ran dry, the natural breaks in the land that sheltered cattle from winter storms, the small house he had built with his own hands. One Saturday in late September, after they had finished lunch and were walking back toward her cabin, Benjamin cleared his throat nervously. "Theresa," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I have something I would like to ask you, but I want you to know there is no pressure, no expectation. If you say no, I will accept that, and it will not change anything between us." Theresa's heart began to pound. "All right. Would you and the children like to come out to the ranch next Sunday? I would like you to see it, to see what I have built. I could drive you out in a wagon after church, show you around, have a picnic perhaps. I would have you back before dark." It was a significant step, going to his ranch, seeing his home. It suggested a seriousness that their Saturday meetings in town did not. Theresa knew that if she agreed, she was opening a door that would be difficult to close again. She looked at Benjamin's face, at the hope and nervousness there, and thought about the man she had come to know over these past months. He was good and kind and hard-working. He had never pressed her for more than she was willing to give, had never been anything but respectful. And more than that, she was beginning to realize that what she felt for him was deeper than simple gratitude or friendship. "We would love to see your ranch," she said, and the joy that lit his face made her decision feel absolutely right. That Sunday, after services at the small wooden church, Benjamin was waiting with a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. He had laid blankets in the back for the children to sit on, and he helped Theresa up to the seat beside him with a courtesy that made her feel precious and protected. The ride out to his ranch took about an hour, and Theresa was struck by the beauty of the land once they left the dusty environs of Pecos behind. The autumn sun painted the desert landscape in shades of gold and amber, and mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels. Benjamin pointed out landmarks, a particular rock formation, the dry creek bed that flooded during spring rains, the place where he had once seen a golden eagle take down a jackrabbit. The ranch, when they arrived, exceeded anything Theresa had imagined. The house was small but solidly built of stone and timber, with a real glass window and a covered porch. There was a barn, corrals, a chicken coop, and beyond, she could see cattle grazing peacefully on the rolling grassland. "The spring is just over that rise," Benjamin said, pointing. "Never goes dry, even in the worst droughts. That is what sold me on this place. A man can survive anything if he has good water." He showed them around with obvious pride, introducing them to his two ranch hands, an older man named Joe and a young Mexican fellow named Carlos who tipped his hat shyly to Theresa. The house inside was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall, a kitchen area with a good stove, and a bedroom partitioned off with a curtain. "It is not much," Benjamin said, suddenly seeming uncertain, "but it is solid. Good roof, keeps out the wind and rain. I have been meaning to add another room, maybe two. A house should have more than one bedroom, I think." Theresa ran her hand along the smooth wooden table, noting the care with which everything had been made and maintained. "It is lovely, Benjamin. You have built something to be proud of." They had their picnic by the spring, which bubbled up clear and cold from between smooth rocks, forming a small pool before trickling away in a stream that sustained the ranch. Benjamin had brought fried chicken and biscuits, cheese and apples, and a jar of lemonade that made the children laugh with delight at its tartness. As Mary and Thomas played near the water under Theresa's watchful eye, Benjamin sat beside her on the blanket, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "I have not been entirely honest with you," he said quietly, and Theresa's heart clenched with sudden fear. "Not dishonest exactly, but not completely forthcoming." "What do you mean?" "When I first saw you in town that day, selling flowers with your children by your side, it was not an impulse that made me buy all of them." "Well, it was, but not the kind of impulse you might think." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were intense. "I had seen you before, Theresa. Many times. Every time I came to town, I looked for you. You were always so graceful, so dignified despite your circumstances. The way you cared for your children, the way you held your head up even though I could see how hard things were, it stirred something in me." Theresa felt her cheeks flush. "Benjamin, please, let me finish. I'm not good with words, and if I do not say this now, I might lose my courage." He took a deep breath. "I bought all your flowers that day because I wanted an excuse to talk to you, to spend time with you. And every Saturday since, I have come to town not because I needed supplies, but because I needed to see you. Theresa, these past months have been the happiest of my life. When I am with you, everything makes sense. When I am at the ranch during the week, I find myself counting the days until Saturday." Theresa's heart was racing now, her breath shallow. "I count the days too," she whispered. Benjamin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but firm. "I know it has only been a few months. I know you might think it is too soon. But I am 30 years old, Theresa, and I have never felt like this before. I look at you and I see everything I have been working for, everything I want my life to be. I see a home filled with laughter and love. I see a partner who is strong and brave and beautiful. I see a future worth building." Theresa felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. "I feel the same way," she said. "I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. After Daniel died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would just survive day to day until the children were grown. But then you came along, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to hope." "Marry me," Benjamin said, and it was not really a question but rather a statement of what should be. "Marry me and come live here with your children. Let me be a father to Mary and Thomas. Let me give them the life they deserve. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." "Yes," Theresa said, and then she was in his arms, his lips on hers in a kiss that was gentle at first and then deeper, full of all the longing and loneliness and hope they had both carried for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, they heard Mary giggling. "Are you going to marry the cowboy, Mama?" the little girl asked, and there was such joy in her voice that Theresa laughed through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart, if you and Thomas would like that." Thomas came running over, launching himself at Benjamin with the complete trust that children have for those they love. "Will you be our papa?" Benjamin caught the boy and held him close, and Theresa saw his eyes were wet too. "I would be honored to be your papa, son." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Pecos, with half the town in attendance. Theresa wore a dress that Benjamin had bought for her, simple but beautiful cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mary and Thomas stood beside them during the ceremony, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the children cheered as loud as any of the adult guests. There was a celebration at the restaurant afterward, with food and music and dancing. Theresa danced with her new husband, letting him spin her around the floor while the fiddle played and people clapped in time. She felt beautiful and cherished and hopeful in a way she had not felt in years. That evening, they loaded their few possessions into Benjamin's wagon and left Pecos behind, heading toward the ranch that was now their home. The cabin Theresa had struggled in for so long stood empty, a monument to hardship and survival that was now part of her past rather than her present. The children fell asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the excitement of the day, and Benjamin put his arm around Theresa as he drove, pulling her close against his side. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "I am going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you stay that way," Benjamin promised. The ranch welcomed them home under a sky full of stars, and Joe and Carlos had decorated the porch with wildflowers, making Theresa laugh and cry at the same time. Benjamin carried the sleeping children inside and tucked them into the small bed he had set up in what would eventually be their own room. Then he took Theresa's hand and led her to their bedroom, and there, in the privacy of their new home, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and complete. Life on the ranch was hard work, but it was good work. Theresa threw herself into making the house a true home, sewing curtains, planting a kitchen garden near the spring, learning to cook on the wood stove. Mary and Thomas thrived in the open spaces, growing brown and strong and happy. Benjamin was a patient and loving father, teaching Thomas to ride, showing Mary how to care for the chickens, including them in the daily work of the ranch in ways that made them feel important and valued. The ranch prospered too. Benjamin's careful management and hard work paid off, and by the following spring, he was able to hire another hand and purchase more cattle. Theresa helped where she could, learning to keep the ranch accounts, tending the garden that now produced enough vegetables to feed them all through the summer and can for the winter. On Saturday evenings, after the work was done and the children were asleep, Benjamin and Theresa would sit on the porch together, watching the sun set over the mountains. Sometimes they talked about their plans for the future, the additional rooms they would build onto the house, the possibility of buying the adjacent property that would double their grazing land. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. "Do you ever regret it?" Benjamin asked one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Giving up your independence, tying yourself to a cowboy and a ranch in the middle of nowhere." Theresa turned to look at her husband, at his strong profile and the way the fading light caught in his hair. "Never," she said firmly. "This is not giving up independence, Benjamin. This is choosing partnership. This is choosing love, and I choose it every single day." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and she leaned into his embrace feeling grateful and blessed and more in love than she had known was possible. As their first year of marriage approached its end, Theresa realized she was pregnant. She told Benjamin one evening after supper, and the joy on his face was absolute. He picked her up and spun her around despite her protests, then carefully set her down and placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said with wonder. "Our baby." Mary and Thomas were thrilled at the prospect of a new brother or sister, and the whole household buzzed with excitement and preparation through the winter months. Benjamin finished the new rooms he had been building, giving Mary and Thomas their own space and creating a nursery for the baby. He carved a cradle from oak, spending long winter evenings by the fire sanding and polishing until it was smooth as silk. Theresa sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and when she worried about the birth, about the dangers that came with bringing a child into the world, Benjamin held her and promised he would be there, that she would not face this alone. Their son was born in early March of 1875, a healthy baby with a strong cry and his father's blue-gray eyes. They named him Daniel Benjamin, honoring both the past and the present, and Benjamin cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to Theresa as she lay exhausted but happy in their bed. "Thank you for this gift, for this life, for everything." Mary and Thomas were gentle and curious with their new brother, and Benjamin was attentive to all three children equally, making sure the older two never felt displaced by the new baby. He was a natural father, patient and firm and endlessly loving. As little Daniel grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Benjamin's reputation as an honest rancher spread, and he began to get contracts to supply beef to the army forts and mining camps. The extra income allowed them to make improvements, to build a bigger barn, to install real glass in all the windows, to buy Theresa a proper stove. But more than the material comforts, what made their life rich was the love that filled their home. Benjamin never took Theresa for granted, never failed to tell her she was beautiful, never went to bed angry if they had disagreed during the day. Theresa supported her husband's dreams while nurturing her own, teaching the children to read and write, corresponding with her few remaining relatives back in Missouri, and even starting to sell her preserves and baked goods in town, taking pride in contributing to their prosperity. When Daniel was 2 years old, Theresa became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. The little girl had her mother's blonde hair and her father's determined chin, and she quickly became the darling of the entire household. "Our quiver is full," Benjamin joked as he held the new baby, surrounded by their 4 children. "It is a blessed quiver," Theresa replied, looking at the family they had built together. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the steady growth of both the ranch and the children. Mary grew into a poised young woman who could ride as well as any cowboy and had her mother's grace and practicality. Thomas became his father's right hand on the ranch, learning everything Benjamin could teach him about cattle and horses and the land. Young Daniel was thoughtful and studious, often found reading books that Theresa ordered from back east. And Grace was a spirited child who kept them all laughing with her antics and observations. By 1883, 10 years after that fateful day when Benjamin had bought all of Theresa's flowers and asked her to supper, the Sawyer Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. They had built a proper 2-story house with 6 bedrooms, a parlor, a dining room, and a kitchen that was Theresa's pride and joy. The barn was large and well-maintained, the corrals were sturdy, and several hundred head of cattle bore the Sawyer brand. But more important than any material success was the family that lived in that house and worked that land. They were bound together by love and respect and shared purpose. When times were hard, as they occasionally were in that unforgiving land, they supported each other. When times were good, they celebrated together. Benjamin never forgot where they had come from, the desperation that had driven Theresa to sell flowers on the street corner, the loneliness that had made him buy them all just for a chance to talk to her. He made sure they helped others when they could, hiring men who needed work, paying fair wages, and extending credit to neighboring ranchers when drought or disease hit their herds. Theresa never forgot either. She kept a single mason jar on the mantel in their parlor, and once a week during the growing season, she filled it with wildflowers, black-eyed Susans, and Indian blankets, just like the ones she used to sell. It was a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had to be grateful for. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their fine house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Benjamin took Theresa's hand in his, just as he had done thousands of times before. "You remember that first supper?" he asked. "When I asked you and the children to the restaurant, and you were so nervous about what people would think." Theresa smiled at the memory. I remember thinking you were either the kindest man I had ever met or completely mad to spend so much money on flowers and supper for strangers." "I knew that night," Benjamin said. "I knew when I saw Thomas laugh over that apple pie, when I saw the way you tried so hard to maintain your dignity despite your circumstances, when I walked you home, and you stood on that sagging porch with your head held high. I knew you were the woman I wanted to spend my life with." "I knew too," Theresa admitted. "Or at least I hoped. I was so afraid to hope, afraid to want something that seemed impossible, but you made me brave enough to try. We have built something beautiful, have we not?" Benjamin said, gesturing to the land spread out before them, to the house behind them full of their children's laughter, to the life they had created together. "We have built something extraordinary," Theresa agreed. "Not just this ranch, not just this house, but this family, this love." Mary came out onto the porch then, lovely in her youth and vigor. "Papa, Thomas says the new foal is standing. Can we go see?" Benjamin started to rise, but Theresa put a hand on his arm. "You go," she said. "Take the children down to see the foal. I want to sit here a moment longer and count my blessings." So Benjamin went with Mary, calling for the others, and soon all 4 of their children were walking with him toward the barn, their voices carrying back on the evening breeze. Theresa watched them go, her heart so full it ached. She thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago, desperate and struggling, selling wildflowers just to feed her children. She thought about the cowboy who had seen past her poverty to the person beneath, who had bought all her flowers not because he needed them, but because he needed her. What a gift it was, she thought, to be loved like this, to be cherished and respected and valued, to wake up each morning beside a man who still looked at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world, to raise children in a home filled with security and affection, to build a legacy together, not just of land and cattle, but of love and partnership and shared dreams. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Theresa said a silent prayer of gratitude for the flowers that had brought them together, for the courage to say yes to supper, for the love that had grown from such unlikely beginnings into something solid and enduring. Benjamin returned with the children as full darkness fell, and they all went inside together. After the children were settled for the night, Benjamin and Theresa climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the one with the big window that looked out over the land they loved. As they prepared for bed, Benjamin caught Theresa around the waist and pulled her close. "I love you," he said simply. "More now than even on the day we married. Every day with you is a gift." "I love you too," Theresa replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for seeing me when I needed to be seen. Thank you for giving me and my children a home. Thank you for every day of these 10 years. They made love that night with the slow, deep pleasure of longtime partners who knew each other's bodies and hearts intimately. Afterward, Theresa lay in Benjamin's arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt a peace that went bone deep. This was happiness, she thought. Not the absence of hardship or struggle, for there had been plenty of both over the years, but the presence of love, the security of partnership, the knowledge that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. As the years continued to pass, the Sawyer family became a fixture in the region. Mary eventually married a young lawyer from Austin and moved to the city, but she visited often with her own children, and her letters were frequent and full of life. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving to be as capable and hardworking as his stepfather. Daniel did go east for schooling, becoming a teacher and eventually opening a school in Pecos that served the children of the growing town. Grace married a neighboring rancher's son and settled on a spread just 5 miles away, close enough to visit almost daily. Benjamin and Theresa grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining character with each passing year. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex as they accumulated decades of shared experiences, weathered hardships together, and celebrated triumphs side by side. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that drew people from 50 miles around. The celebration lasted all day, with food and music and dancing, and when Benjamin took Theresa in his arms for a waltz, everyone stopped to watch the couple who had become legendary in the region for their devotion to each other. 25 years, Benjamin said as they danced. It does not seem possible. And hopefully 25 more, Theresa replied. At least, Benjamin agreed. I plan to love you until my last breath and then find a way to love you beyond that. They did get those additional years and many more besides. As the new century approached, Benjamin and Theresa became patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included not just their own children but grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch, now run primarily by Thomas and his sons, continued to prosper, and the Sawyer name was synonymous with integrity and quality throughout West Texas. But despite all their success and prosperity, Benjamin and Theresa never forgot their beginnings. The mason jar of wildflowers still appeared on the mantel every week that flowers could be found. And every year on the anniversary of the day they met, Benjamin would buy flowers in town, all of them, whatever was available, and bring them home to his wife. Still courting me, Theresa would tease. Always, Benjamin would reply. Every single day. In the spring of 1906, when Theresa was 57 and Benjamin was 60, they sat together on the porch of their home, surrounded by 3 generations of family who had gathered for Easter. Children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. The smell of roasting meat drifted from the kitchen where their daughters and daughters-in-law were preparing the feast. Sons and sons-in-law were examining a new bowl Benjamin had purchased. "Look at what we have made," Theresa said softly, watching her great-granddaughter chase a butterfly across the grass. "Look at the life that came from a chance meeting on a street corner." "Not chance," Benjamin corrected gently. "Providence. I believe we were meant to find each other, Theresa. I believe that every hard thing you endured, every struggle I faced, was leading us to that moment when I saw you selling flowers and knew I had found my home." "Your home was the ranch," Theresa said. "No," Benjamin shook his head. "The ranch is just land and buildings. You are my home. You have always been my home. Wherever you are is where I belong." Theresa felt the familiar sting of happy tears. Even after more than 30 years of marriage, this man could still make her heart flutter like a girl's. As the sun began to set on that perfect day, painting the Texas sky in the brilliant colors that had witnessed so much of their life together, Benjamin took Theresa's hand and raised it to his lips. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For saying yes. For trusting me. For building this life with me. For loving me." He smiled at her, his blue-gray eyes still clear and bright despite the years. For selling flowers on a street corner in Pecos on a July day in 1873. For being brave enough to accept supper from a lonely cowboy. For everything. Theresa leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the dependable strength that had been her anchor for more than 3 decades. "You saved us," she said quietly. "Me and my children. We were drowning and you threw us a line." "No," Benjamin said firmly. "You saved yourself. You were already strong, already surviving, already keeping your family together against impossible odds. I just gave you a better place to direct that strength. We saved each other, Theresa. That is what love does. It saves us from loneliness and despair. It gives us purpose. It makes us better than we could ever be alone." The family called them to dinner then, and they rose together, walking hand in hand into the house filled with the people their love had brought into the world. The table was long and crowded, every seat filled, and as Benjamin said grace over the meal, he gave thanks for the blessings they had received, for the family gathered around them, and for the woman who had made it all possible. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. They lost friends and saw their children's children have children of their own. They watched the world change around them, the wild frontier becoming settled and civilized, automobiles replacing horses in town, electricity coming to Pecos, though their ranch still relied on lamps and candles. Through it all, they remained constants in each other's lives, the love that had begun over wildflowers and steak dinners proving strong enough to weather any storm. When Benjamin was 72 and Theresa 69, he became ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. The doctor came out from town and did what he could, but everyone knew that at his age, such illnesses could be fatal. Theresa refused to leave his bedside, tending to him with fierce devotion, praying with an intensity she had not felt since the dark days after Daniel's death, when she had not known how she would survive. But Benjamin rallied, his strength returning slowly as winter gave way to spring. And on the first warm day, when he was well enough to sit up in bed, he looked at Theresa with love and gratitude. "You brought me back," he said, his voice still weak but clear. "I was not ready to let you go," Theresa replied. "We made a deal, remember, to love each other until the last breath. I am holding you to that, Benjamin Sawyer." He recovered fully, though he was slower afterward, content to let Thomas and his grandsons handle most of the ranch work while he spent his days on the porch or in the garden, Theresa always nearby. They had reached that stage of life where simply being together was enough, where they communicated as much through comfortable silences as through words, where their love had become something so deeply woven into the fabric of their beings that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. On a warm evening in late September, as autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and the air carried the first hint of the coming winter, Benjamin and Theresa sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting in spectacular fashion, the sky ablaze with color. "It is beautiful," Theresa said, watching the display. "Not as beautiful as you," Benjamin replied, and she laughed because he had said the same thing so many times over the years and it never got old, never failed to make her feel cherished. "You are an incorrigible romantic," she teased. "Only for you," he said. "Only ever for you." They sat in peaceful silence as the stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had watched over them for nearly 40 years of marriage. Inside the house, they could hear their great-grandchildren playing, visiting for the week with their parents. The sound of young laughter had always filled their home, and it was a blessing that continued even into their old age. "We have had a good life," Benjamin said quietly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "The best life," Theresa agreed. "I cannot imagine having lived it any other way with anyone else. When I saw you that first time, selling flowers with your children beside you, I thought you were the bravest woman I had ever seen," Benjamin said. "And every day since has proven me right. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Theresa felt tears on her cheeks, but they were good tears, grateful tears. "And you have been my safe harbor, my partner, my love. You took my broken pieces and helped me become whole again. You loved my children as your own. You built this life for us, with us. Everything good in my life came from saying yes to supper with a kind cowboy who bought all my flowers." They sat together under the stars, hands clasped, hearts entwined, surrounded by the life they had built through hard work and dedication, and most of all through love. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving, a legacy that would continue for generations. Their children and grandchildren were happy and successful, carrying forward the values Benjamin and Theresa had instilled. And most importantly, they had each other still, after all these years. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they finally rose and went inside, climbing the stairs to their bedroom one more time. They had climbed those stairs together countless times, in joy and sorrow, in sickness and health, through all the various seasons of their long life together. That night they lay in each other's arms, warm and safe and content, and as sleep began to claim them, Benjamin whispered what he had whispered every night for nearly 40 years. "I love you, Theresa." And she replied as she always had, "I love you, Benjamin, today, tomorrow, and always." The years that followed were peaceful ones. They grew older but never old in spirit, maintaining their humor and their love and their interest in the world around them. They watched automobiles become common and airplanes take to the skies. They saw their great-great-grandchildren born and held them with joy. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a party that required 3 whole steers to feed all the guests. Benjamin lived to be 82 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning with Theresa beside him, just as he had wished. His last words, spoken the night before, were a repetition of what he had said thousands of times, "I love you." Theresa mourned him deeply, as one mourns the loss of half of oneself, but she did not mourn alone. She was surrounded by the family they had created, by the legacy of their love. And though she missed him with an ache that never fully went away, she also felt gratitude for the life they had shared, for every moment they had been given. She lived 5 more years, staying on the ranch she loved, tending her flowers, watching her family continue to grow and thrive. And when it was her turn to go, she went peacefully, surrounded by love, secure in the knowledge that she had lived a life that mattered. On her bedside table to the very end sat a single mason jar filled with wildflowers, black-eyed Susans and Indian blankets, just like the ones she had sold so long ago in Pecos, Texas, when she had been a desperate widow trying to feed her children and a lonely cowboy had bought them all and changed her life forever. The ranch continued for generations, the Sawyer name becoming legendary in West Texas. The story of Benjamin and Theresa was told and retold, becoming family lore, a testament to the power of love and the way a single moment of kindness can change everything. And though they were gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the land they had worked, the house they had built, and the family they had raised. In every wildflower that bloomed in the Texas spring, in every sunset that painted the sky in brilliant colors, in every act of kindness and courage their descendants performed, Benjamin and Theresa lived on. Their story began with flowers sold on a dusty street corner and an invitation to supper. It grew into something magnificent, a love that spanned decades and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It proved that hope can be found in the darkest circumstances, that love can heal the deepest wounds, and that 2 lonely souls can find each other even in the vast wilderness of the American West. In the end, it was a simple story and a profound one. A widow sold flowers to feed her children. A cowboy bought them all and asked her to supper. And from that beginning came a love that was true and deep and lasting, the kind of love that changes the world one moment, one choice, one brave yes at a time.